Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Behind me, a 2002 Toyota Camry with a 2.4 liter. Started off just being a head job. The customer called when I almost had the head off. Customer called and said, hey, can we just go ahead and rebuild the entire engine? I said, yes, let's do this. So I'm gonna try to use some of the footage from before when I was just doing the head job. I have a lot of stuff off, like the intake manifold, the exhaust manifold, and all that stuff is already off. So I'll try to use that footage to explain that part of it. But the goal of this video is to get the engine out of the vehicle. Second video is the teardown. Third video is putting it all back together and back in the vehicle, firing it up for the first time. Before doing a big job like this, I like to go ahead and just do a complete health report. So these are the codes. The cruise control, ABS, airbag, and immobilizer are all good. We have a few engine codes, P302, 303, and 304. So that's cylinder 2, 3, and 4, misfire detected. And then the air fuel sensor, or the O2 sensor heater circuit. So those are the codes we have pre-operation, pre-work. That way we have it documented, and if anything presents itself new, then we'll know based on our pre-report. So I already went ahead and pulled off this so I could do the compression test. One thing to note, just for the customer, if the customer's watching, is number 3 right here. The bolt was already stripped, and it looks like somebody put tape around the bolt itself so that it would bolt in, but it is stripped on this valve cover. So we'll rectify that when we put it all back together. So we'll pull these off. They're 10mm bolts, and we'll go ahead and disconnect the connector and just pull our coils off. So there's a lot that needs to come off. You can start pretty much wherever you'd like. Exhaust manifold needs to come off. That's probably gonna be one of the, I don't wanna say hardest, but breaking exhaust bolts is always something that kind of makes you nervous. So you can start with the exhaust. You can start with the intake. That's another thing that may take some time to get off. So starting with those harder things first isn't a bad idea, but really anywhere that you start is fine. Just another thing to note is that this torque strut mount here is garbage. So we'll hopefully get another one of those when we put it all back together. This hose for the PCV, also garbage. But on these older vehicles, what do you expect? So you're gonna run into things like that that may need to be replaced extra. Let's start with the exhaust. That feels good to me. Now, on the exhaust shield, there are 4 bolts. I already got those off. I thought I was recording, but wasn't. We can unplug the O2 sensor. There we go. And then pull this shield off. Of course, we can't do that without unbolting this. So I like leaving bolts either with the part that I took off or bolted back on where the bolts came out. Either one, just so when it comes time to put it all back together, we're relatively organized. Now this, now we do have an O2 heater code. This looks like a new O2 sensor. Sometimes cheap aftermarket O2 sensors, the ohms inside the heater are different, and that's enough to trip a code even though it's working properly. So we'll address that later. We'll pull off these right here. They're just 1, 2, 3, 4, looks like 5 nuts that come off. Now on this one here by the alternator, we're gonna have to take the alternator off later anyway. So if you want to take the alternator off now before this nut, go for it. But if you have a ratcheting wrench, or if you're patient with just a standard wrench, you can get it off now. But just the fact that all of them broke loose without breaking any of the studs or anything like that is enough to make me happy. So you can see there's a bolt right there. And then on the other side, there's just another bolt right there. I believe they're 14mm, just those 2 bolts. We don't have to pull it off of the catalytic converter. We don't have to pull it off of this, just what bolts to the engine. All right, so now we have 2 bolts on this bolted into the catalytic converter. Let's find the right size. So mine are 17. Let's see if these will come off. Yeah, that wasn't bad. Actually a little shocked. All right, so that's loose, so it should come off up top. Let's see what else we can do while we're down here. So this is the back of, or the bottom of the intake manifold. If you notice, right there is a bolt, and then over here there's a bolt right there. So 2 bolts underneath that we can get while we're down here. I believe they're 12 mil, but I could be wrong. I think they are 12, but either way, 2 bolts. All right, back up top. I believe this is ready. There we go. That comes straight up and out. So now let's work on pulling the intake manifold off. So we'll just pull this air filter box off, just the top of it. So we can pull the mass airflow sensor, unplug that. There's the purge solenoid connector, we'll unplug that. And then another little solenoid or valve or something on this side. This hose can come off here. We have another hose that can come off down here. Well, we'll leave it on down there. We'll actually pull it off up here. It's just easier to get to. We'll just twist the hose, pop it off. We got this hose. We might have to replace it as well, but we'll try to twist it and pop it off. Maybe it'll pop out of here better. And then there's a clamp right here where the intake duct goes into the manifold or throttle body. Get a pair of pliers. I might need a bigger pair of pliers. All right, now we can disconnect our throttle body connector. Now there's a bracket that holds on that throttle body connector and the fuel rail. I'm just gonna pull that 1 bolt out so that this bracket can come out as 1 unit instead of trying to disconnect this and pull out the fuel line. I believe the head gasket kit comes with a new throttle body gasket, so this throttle body will probably be coming off of the intake manifold anyway. But there we go. Now there's 2 hoses back here, coolant hoses that need to come off, and they're connected to the throttle body. Just with a pair of pliers, they'll come off. Give them a twist, and they'll unstick, and then we'll just pull them off. Now you'll probably lose some coolant. That's okay. At some point we want to drain the radiator anyway, but usually it's not a lot that comes out of these. I lied, it's a lot. Let me plug those back up. And so I'm gonna get a catch pan and we'll go ahead and drain the radiator now. All right, so while that's draining, we're gonna go ahead and continue with our dismantling. We wanna unplug the fuel injectors. There's 4 of them. And then this VVT solenoid in the back. Just unplug. Then we can pull this whole harness up and out of the way. Then we can unbolt the fuel rail, 12 millimeter bolts. Have safety goggles on while you're doing this, just in case. So now we can pull it up, pull all the injectors up. There we go. We don't have to disconnect the fuel line. We just take this whole rail and have it slide over and just out of our way. Now we have access to our top bolts. I believe there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 top bolts. 12 millimeter. Need an extension for that one. Now this one towards the front is right underneath the VVT solenoid. It might be in your way. See if I can get it without disconnecting a bunch of stuff over here. Oh, probably totally in your way, but that's okay. There we go. All right, got all those bolts. Now there is this hose here. I believe it goes to the brake booster. Just a 10 mil, we want to pull that off. It's just a bracket. All right, I think that's it. If I'm not mistaken, there is one more hose on the side down here, but we'll get to it as it comes up. Yeah, just one more hose right here that will pull off. In fact, you can leave it on and unplug it back here, unplug it against the firewall, and then we won't accidentally forget it before we put the manifold back on. So pulling the hose off in a spot that's easy to see can help us in the future. Alrighty. All right, so now let's focus on getting what we need to off of the front here. We're gonna pull this torque strut off. We got this grounding strap. We'll go ahead and just pull it off up here. That bolt back. Pull this off. Yeah, we'll use a breaker bar for that one. So that comes off. We can pull this off the alternator. Really, all these plugs can be unplugged near the alternator, just so that this harness has more freedom to move. Which reminds me, we should also unplug or disconnect the battery cables before we do too much around the alternator. So I'll do that real quick. It's just good practice. We don't want to short anything out. It will mess up your engine computer, or has the potential to. Also, before I forget, you want to stuff a rag in the exhaust. It'd suck if you dropped a bolt down the exhaust pipe. So like mentioned before, you don't have to pull this off, pull the timing stuff off, leave it. So leave all this bolted back together. We do want to pull this torque strut off. This harness we want to get as disconnected as possible. So we'll do that. So in this little corner, that's where I'll be working next. We're going to pull the alternator off. First get the belt off, then pull the alternator off, and the AC compressor will get out of the way. So the belt tensioner broke trying to get the serpentine belt off. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it off. So we'll need a new tensioner and a new belt. If you have to do this, just be really careful. There's a lot of tension on these. Trying to find the best way to get in there. Okay, watch yourself. Make sure nothing is in the way that's going to get damaged. There we go. All right, so now we'll go ahead and pull the alternator off. Got a 14 up top and a 12 on the bottom. I already got the harness disconnected and everything. Make sure you have the battery cables disconnected before you do this. You don't want to short anything out. A little wiggling and a jiggling comes out. Just to keep things in order, I like putting the bolts back with whatever I took off. All right, AC compressor should have, looks like 4 bolts, 12 millimeter. So I'm gonna pull this radiator hose out of the way. A pick like this is great for breaking loose hoses. So I'm able to get to 3 of them with just a socket and a ratchet, but this refrigerant hose is in the way. So I'm gonna pull out what I can, and I think I can get a ratcheting wrench in there for the last one, because I don't wanna have to evacuate the refrigerant. But I mean, if we do have to, we got the equipment for it. But I'm hoping we don't have to. Just a ratcheting wrench like this, and it doesn't look like my ratcheting wrench will fit in there. It's gonna take forever. Okay, got it loose. I'm just gonna wiggle on it and pull it out with my fingers little by little. Okay, so it's off. I think that can just get left to the side here. Let me show you real quick. So the AC compressor, this bolt right here, you can't really get off because that hose, that line's in the way. So I just unbolted the other 3 and then did this one with my fingers. Once I cracked it loose, did it with my fingers, and then just slowly backed this out, and there it is. And so it'll just sit here and just rest out of the way. As long as it's disconnected from the engine, that's all we care about. So now we want to go over and do the power steering pump on the other side of the engine and get that disconnected and just laid out of the way as well. The lighting might not be the best. We got 2 10 millimeter bolts holding this cover on. All right, now that gives us access, better access anyway, to our engine mount here we want to pull off. We don't have to pull off the whole mount. We just have to pull off this top piece here, I believe. We'll see, we may have to pull off the whole thing, but I believe it's just this top nut. Here, let me show you. This top nut here, because the engine will be lifted up off of it. We don't have to pull this whole thing out. So let's clean it off real well. I want to say it's a 19 millimeter. Hopefully it'll come out without too much of a fight. Oh, mama. Let me get a breaker bar. All right, I have a breaker bar. I'm gonna bring it around. Nope, that's not gonna work. All right, let me see. Oh, yeah. That wasn't bad with the breaker bar. All right, that's off. Now let's see what we gotta do for our power steering pump. I think we have to pull off the tensioner. All right, change of plan. So I'm gonna leave the power steering pump on, but I'm just gonna disconnect the hoses. They're easy to get to from up top. So we'll go ahead and do that, put a drip pan underneath to collect any of the fluid that comes out, but just pull the lines off, leave the pump on, that'll be easier. And really, to be honest, we're just pulling off anything that is connected to the engine from the rest of the body of the vehicle, because we're pulling this whole thing out as one. So there's really not necessarily like a step-by-step list. You're just trying to get anything that looks attached off of the engine so that it's separated completely from the body, and then we'll pull it off. So that's how I'm gonna address the power steering pump. Just pull the lines off, easy peasy. So you don't have to pull the tensioner off or anything like that. So let me do that, and then this side is done. There is, grab my light, back here, a mounting bracket for your CV axle. So we'll go ahead and unbolt it here. The axle doesn't have to come out. We just wanna unbolt it from the engine. Just a couple of 14 mil, I believe they are. So we'll crawl under the vehicle, do that real quick. And then this whole side is done. The front is done. The back is done. So now we just hop over to the transmission side and get everything disconnected from there. So we're almost there. All right, so I finished everything over there. Underneath, I was able to get the axle bearing bolts. There were 3 of those. There were 4 transmission bolts I got as well while under there, and then 2 more exhaust bolts that were under there I ended up getting. So I believe everything underneath is done. Everything on this side is done. So now we just have the transmission side that we're gonna work on. Pull the box out. We'll pull the starter motor as well. This mount in the front is connected to the transmission, so don't need to pull that. We do have these heater core hoses we can get. Pull those off. All right, got those off. That can stay on there. Now we have to get rid of this wiring harness connected to the back. Let me figure that one out. Looks like maybe there's a little bolt down there. All right, one little bolt. Holding that on. Now that's free and loose. All right, there's a ground strap back there and 1 connector. There we go. Got it. So now we just have the transmission bolts. Figure out what size they are. 17 millimeter. Leave that in a few threads. See if we can get that one. Looks like a different size. So we may have to remove this front mount just to get to that bolt down there. Then once we get the bolt off, we can put that mount back. So let me do that real quick. It still has the front motor mount, so I'm not worried about pulling this off. I have a jack under it anyway, just in case, but I don't think there's a big issue with pulling this off. Just so you can see, I'm just pulling this front motor mount off. It's bolted to the transmission. Now that gives me access to that bolt. Yeah, perfect. That bottom bolt's a 14. All right, I think that is everything. I got all the transmission belt housing bolts off. I got 5 altogether on this one. Oh, 5 on the top. I think 4 on the bottom. So the top had 2 14 millimeter bolts and 3 17 millimeter bolts. So I'm gonna take the hood off next and then pull the car forward, just push it forward just a little so we can get the hoist on it. Doing this one person is kind of hard. It's nice to have a partner. So this shock comes off. I'll lower this as much as possible and just pull these off. Let's do our best not to scratch it. Looks good. Pull it up from the front and then I'll set it down somewhere. Coming your way. Nice, that's it. So, let me push the car forward and we'll get the hoist. I have a roof mounted or a ceiling mounted hoist. So we'll get this rolled under. This engine's ready to come up. All right, hopefully I got everything. So right now I'm just separating the engine from the bell housing. All right, I'm a dork. I forgot to unbolt the flywheel bolts. No big deal. I'll go under, show you where they are, how you get access to them, and just pull those out. There should be 6 altogether. All right, underneath the vehicle from the passenger side looking towards the transmission, there's a little black square cover right there. I already took it off, and that reveals all the bolts. Well, it reveals one at a time. You have to turn the engine to reveal all the others. All right, my battery died. Where were we? I unbolted the torque converter from the flywheel. So that is done. I'm lowering the vehicle. I had it jacked up so I can get under there for the bolts. So now I'm just lowering it. I think I'm pretty home free. Still moving it away from the transmission a little as I go up with it. Oh, there we go. That was a good little move. Still going up. Just checking stuff, making sure I'm not pulling on any wiring or anything like that while going up. Okay, still looking good. So the engine isn't necessarily going up at this moment, the car is going down. Okay, looking good, looking good. All right, that's it. So the vehicle is down on the ground all the way. So now I'll lift the engine up with the hoist. Okay, what's it on? Good, good. All right, looks like that's it. We are free of everything. I'm just gonna turn this real quick. The only reason why I'm doing that is because my cable up here, it got crisscross. Now that was probably my fault, hooking it up. All right, go up the rest of the way. So now what I'm gonna do is just push the car back, leave the engine where it is, push the car backwards, and get this on an engine stand, and we are done with this video. Now, one thing to note here, let me pull you around. I don't know what all these shavings are. I don't know if you can see all those metal shavings. If something was drilled out and helicoiled, I'm not sure, but it is all over the back of this engine. This is where the intake manifold would sit, so it's right under the intake manifold. So not sure. They don't look like any helicoil or anything. But I just wanted to point that out. All right, so I'm just gonna pull the flywheel off real quick before bolting it to the engine stand. Okay. Up we go. All right, here she is. So the engine's on the stand, and then we can mess with it as needed. All right, the engine is out. It's actually the next morning, filming this portion of it. But a few things to note. That motor mount or engine mount on the far passenger side by the crank pulley, that does need to come off completely. So the mount on the frame and the bracket on the engine both need to come off. Not too hard, you can jack the engine up. There's 3 bolts underneath the frame mount, and then that one nut on top, and then it can separate and you can wiggle it out, and then 3 bolts holding that bracket on. That's important. Yes, do not forget the torque converter bolts, the flywheel bolted to the torque converter. That's important. And then I think when it goes in, I'm gonna pull the transmission mount off in the front. I'll show you in just a second. The reason is because the transmission wants to sag a little. So I wanna pull that mount off, put a jack underneath the transmission and just raise that bell housing up just a little for installation. Let me show you real quick. It's probably hard to tell, but the transmission is slanted forward a little. So I'm gonna pull this mount off right here, put a jack underneath just to raise the front of the bell housing up just a little so that it mates evenly with the engine when we put it all back together. Other than that, pretty simple, really. You're just pulling any peripherals off, anything that's gonna be in the way and is attached to the engine. So the whole engine just comes off as an assembly, and that's it. If you never pulled an engine before, it's not too bad, really. All the pulleys can stay on the front. You can pull them off if you'd like. That may give you a little more clearance, but it was not necessary. All right, thanks for watching. In the next video, I'm just gonna be tearing this down. The head is gonna come off. Look inside the cylinders just to see the condition of the cylinders. It's getting rebuilt, so new rings and all that anyway, but we wanna know, is it really scored? Do we need to bore out the cylinders a little? Do we need to go oversized with the pistons and the rings? Or can we just do a good hone and just put stock sizes back in? So that'll be the next step. The head will be going to the machine shop and the block will be going to the machine shop. So we need to just strip everything down and bring those in. Thanks for watching. Be sure to watch the next video. See you on the next one.